Hi, I'm Terry Monville, Technical Advisor at Goujon Brothers. Today we're working on a J22 and we're going to rebed a winch and show how using epoxy can help seal the core and also keep it from being compressed. There's a number of good reasons for using epoxy to seal the core and the deck of a boat. The most obvious is moisture. Keeping moisture out of the core with a balsa core or wood will keep it from rotting and breaking down. And then with foam or wood deck, moisture in there in northern climates can freeze, creating delamination and softening of the deck. One of the less obvious reasons for using epoxy in the deck is we're actually going to hollow out an area of the core and replace it with an annulus of epoxy. This will create a strong area of high compression load because you can create quite a bit of pressure with nut and bolt and crush balsa and foam cores pretty easily and actually lose strength of holding power in the deck. And now we're going to start to tear the winch apart. And we can see from here that this winch has been rebedded a couple of times. You can see the white caulk on here in the deck, and also that there's a clear silicone that seems to have broken down a bit. So this is a good reason why to redo the winches or your deck hardware a number of times. The caulks do break down over time and should be redone. Doing this putting the epoxy in there if the caulk does break down, or you've done a poor job of caulking it or the previous person, this is a good way to protect the deck and save yourself a very costly repair. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to drill out the holes and oversize them just a little bit, just to make sure that we've removed all the caulk that's been in there. So I'm just oversizing it enough just to get a little bit larger than what the hole was at this point. This way I know I'm getting all the caulk off the sides, may even wobble the drill bit a little bit. The idea here is just to make sure that all the contaminants are out of the way. And with doing this, you want to check, make sure you don't have little hang-onnies like this little piece here. Get that cleaned out good. And check down in the holes and around the edges to make sure it's good and clean. A lot of times you can use a wood chisel a little bit, just to open it up a little if needed. At this point, I'm not going to worry about the other caulk on the deck. Don't want to make a mess, or sometimes people wash or use a solvent wash on this, and I don't want anything running down the holes creating contamination. You can also look down in the holes, and you won't be able to see it on camera, but the core here is nice and blonde looking and dry. I can tell that from out here, which is a good sign you don't have a further repair to do. The next thing we're going to do is use a bent nail trick, it's called. And this is in our user's manual, we'll get to later. But basically what you do is you bend a nail, and it needs to be pretty sturdy. This is a number 8 nail. And I just put it in a vise, and you bend it about 1/4 of an inch. You don't want to go too far because balsa core especially is pretty strong. So it will bend a nail, catch, and these holes are fairly small. So this is plenty. And then I just cut the head off with a hacksaw so it fits into the chuck nicely. You do want to be careful when putting this in and chucking it up. As that spins, that can catch a finger and cut you fairly bad. So when you start off, you want to be really careful. Kind of make sure you get it in there deep, and then go real slow to start with. And you'll see it'll start cutting away the wood, making it easier. As you do it, you want to make sure you go push it all the way around the sides so you cut all the sides, and lift it up and down so you get all the wood out from between the 2 layers of fiberglass. This seems intimidating to you. You could, looking down in there, knowing that it's nice and blonde core, like the pieces that we have that are coming out in good shape, you could just saturate the core by using a cotton swab or a pipe cleaner soaked in epoxy, running it in and out of the hole. And you get good moisture resistance that way, but you don't gain the compression strength benefit. So if your core does look dark or wet in there, or the pieces coming out are wet and dark, you may need to investigate further. Just digging the core out around the hole or wetting it's not going to work because epoxy is not going to cure in a wet area. You may have rotten core back further, so you may need to go in and do a complete core replacement repair. But this is a good way of finding out if your fasteners have leaked. So the next step of the repair is we're actually going to put tape on the back side of the holes. You need to make sure that the back side is nice and clean so the tape sticks well. You want to make sure it's sealed well so that it doesn't leak and drip down onto something important, or just have an epoxy mess inside your cabin. After I cleaned off the caulk and dirt that was on the back side, I'm going to use shrink wrap tape. You can use a duct tape or something else, but I like the plastic tape because it has good bonding and releases from the epoxy really well. So filling in the holes today, we're going to use the 105 resin with the 206 hardener. We're working at about 70-degree temperature, and filling in small holes, 205 could be used, but I like the 206 because it's a little slower cure, and it'll soak into the core a little bit further and have a chance to settle and let air bubbles out that we may have trapped. So today we're going to be using the 404 filler, the high density. This has the highest compression strength of our fillers, and that's what we're working on today, is keep it from the nut and bolt crushing the deck. So this is the best choice. Another good choice is a colloidal silica. It works very well in this application also. So for filling the holes, we're going to use the 807 syringe, and I'm going to cut it back about halfway. A pair of scissors. This is going to give me a nice big opening, but yet it's long enough that I can reach down the bottom of the hole and fill from the bottom of the hole coming back up to the top. This way preventing any air voids and making sure that the cavity is completely filled and not leaving any space for moisture or water to get in. An air void could actually create a channel for water to run through and get back into your core, which is the reason we're doing this. So another choice is our 810 fillable caulking tubes. These can be used for larger projects like doing a large sail track and bigger holes. I definitely would want to use a 209 extra slow hardener. The time to mix it up, fill the tubes, and then actually apply it, and the fact that you're applying into large volumes where epoxy does cure quicker, you want to use extra slow to make sure you don't have an exotherm issue. So now that we're getting ready to mix up the epoxy, we want to make sure we wear gloves. I've been wearing my safety glasses all along here. So now we're going to mix up the epoxy. 1 pump of resin. 1 pump of hardener as always with the 300 mini pumps. And this is a fairly small job. I think 2 pumps of each is going to be more than enough. Make sure to mix the epoxy extremely well, scraping the sides of the cup. And with our mixing sticks, the flat bottom, just so you can scrape the bottom well. Once the resin or hardener is well blended, you can now add the filler of your choice, the 404 in this case. And stir that in until you get to the consistency that you like. I'm looking for a mayonnaise consistency in this case. That way it's thick enough to kind of stay in place, but yet flow through the syringe. Now filling the syringe, the epoxy is too thick to be sucked up through the end, so we're actually going to kind of coax it in there, using the stick to kind of push it down in. Again, going to the bottom of the hole and start filling from the bottom and working your way up. You only want to bring it to the top of the hole. You don't want it proud. It may soak down in a little bit and level out. But that's okay. In about a half an hour, we're going to come back and check this and make sure that they're topped off and that nothing is leaked inside the cabin. The reason we want these nice and flat is tomorrow after these cure and we come back to drill them out, it's easier to get a drill to start on a flat surface and also keep it centered than trying to start a drill on the tip of a bump. So we're back. It's been about 45 minutes. The timing on this isn't real critical. The thing you really have to watch is the temperature. If it's colder out, it's going to take a little longer to settle in. If it's really warm out, you want to be a little more cautious because it's going to cure fast. And you don't want it to become hard. What you want, as you can see here, is, and in the hole, is going to be a little bit kind of sticky, gooey. It's thickened up, but not fully cured. That's kind of ideal because now you can still reuse what you had and not have to make another pot. On here, it looks like we've done a good job. They've dished down a little bit probably from working into little crevices and cracks and soaking into the core a little bit. What you want to really look for is if they're bubbling out, they probably have an air void. And as the epoxy cured, it warms up and the air expands and it'll create a larger void and usually pushes out the top. So you can kind of poke a hole in it and fill it that way. So these are in good shape. I'm just going to take a little bit on the end of my stick, real carefully put a little dab on each one, clean up the stick, and wipe them nice and smooth. Again, this will help with tomorrow with drilling it out. So we're going to let the epoxy cure out overnight, let it get hard so we can drill it out tomorrow. We're in a climate controlled shop, so with the 206 and being 70 degrees in here, I know this is going to cure out well overnight. If you're working outside and it gets cold at night, especially if dropping below 60 Fahrenheit, you're going to want to give it a little extra time to cure, because under 60, 206 will stop curing. And if you know it's going to be cold and it's a small fill like this one, 205 might be a good option for you, so that way you can get back on it the next day. So we're back today. The epoxy is nice and hard, but before we start to drill out and remount the winch, we're going to clean off this dirt that got trapped underneath the winch base. And if you have a dirty surface, nothing's going to adhere to it, the caulk or epoxy. So we're going to clean that off. We're going to use a stainless steel wire brush. You can use brass. You don't want to use just a plain steel brush, because any of the wires come off, you won't notice them until they create a rust mark on your deck. So I'm using a little isopropyl alcohol to help get the dirt off the surface. Some of that's stained down in there pretty good. And now what we're going to do is we're going to oversize the holes a little bit, make plenty of room for the screws to fit through. So you can use the screws as an idea for size. It just needs to be slightly bigger so it falls through easily. But I also use barrel nuts on the back side. That way I don't have any sharp objects sticking down into the cabin. So actually we need it big enough to make sure the barrel nut will fit in the back side of the hole also. All right, so now that we've chosen the proper size drill for this, we're just going to simply center it up and drill through. And you can notice that all the shavings that are coming out are epoxy, and there's no wood being shown through there. Another thing that I like to do is actually put a little chamfer around the holes. This creates an area of gap between the base and the deck that can actually create like a little O-ring with a sealant that we're going to use. It's not required, but it's a nice thing to do. It helps out. Now that we got the deck wire brushed and clean, drilled the holes and chamfered them, I took the time last night while the epoxy was curing to sand off the finish on the teak riser and put on 3 coats of WEST System 105 with 207 Special Clear. This makes a nice base for varnish or paint over the top. I'll end up varnishing this when I do the rest of the teak. So I sanded the back of the base that I had put epoxy on to make sure that the sealant will adhere to it. If you leave it shiny or you don't clean up the deck, you're not going to get a good bond between the deck and the block with the sealant, and that alone can create a leak. So now that we're going to put a sealant down, there's a decision on what sealant to use. There's polysulfides, silicones, and polyurethanes out there. I like the polysulfides because they stay flexible for a long time. If need be, they can be painted depending on where you're using them at. And if I ever have to take it off again, it's now a permanent adhesive, because this is a winch that's going to be redone a couple times over the years. Because most sealants and caulks only last about 8 to 10 years, and it should be redone. So I don't get a bunch of adhesive on top of my winch or in it. I put the screws in first, and then put a little caulk around them to help seal, just to make double sure. And on some deck hardware, you want to make sure there's a particular way to put it on. This particular winch has a small drain cut in it, so when water comes in the winch handle hole, it can drain out. So you want to make sure that's facing outward so it can drain off. On the inside, where I'm through bolting the deck, behind the nut, I'm going to be using a fender washer. This winch carries fairly light load, so I'm not too worried about it. If it was a larger winch or something that carries a high load, you'd want to move up to a backing plate, which is a larger plate that spreads the load out over the deck area better. For the small winch, these fender washers do a nice job. There's no reason to apply bedding compound to the portion of the fastener, washer, or nut inside the boat. This will allow the water to leak into the boat when the outer bedding fails, letting you know it's time to rebed. Bedding on the inside of the fastener will only hold water in the fastener hole, which may lead to crevice corrosion of the stainless steel fasteners or penetration into the core. Clean up any squeeze out. Looks pretty good. And then you can reassemble the winch. Good to go.